I'd like to ask you a question. If obesity is driving the diabetes pandemic, then how can thin people get type 2 diabetes? So, I was at a restaurant a couple of weeks ago with a friend, and uh, we were looking. There were about 40 people in this restaurant. There was a table of younger folks, looked like they were in their 30s, and significant obesity. Right next to them was a table with older folks, looked like they were 60s, my age, thinner. And she said, "I bet the old folks are fine and the young folks have diabetes." And my perspective was, maybe not. Maybe it's the exact opposite, at least with a couple of those folks. And it's true. You'll see it time and time again where somebody comes in and they're young. They may have obesity, but their body's handling it. As they get older, however, not so much. So I'm going to share a very personal fact. When I was 57, I, for the first time, saw my blood sugar go over 200. And that was really the only time. It was a couple of times during that period. I was 160 pounds at that point. I'm 5'10. So my BMI was 23.0. I wasn't a heavy guy, still am not. BMI in the low 20s is that's supposed to be the goal. So again, let's ask that question. If obesity epidemic is driving the diabetes pandemic, then how can thin people get diabetes? Well, first of all, before we go there, let me just redefine something. When I say diabetes, I'm not talking about type 1 diabetes. It's a totally different disease. It's a disease where something happens, usually immunologically, and it wipes out your pancreas's ability to make insulin. So you can't make insulin. That's not what we're talking about. And in fact, people might get frustrated with folks like me using the term diabetes to mean type 2 diabetes. But the reality is, at least 95% of all diabetes is type 2 diabetes. And if it's a different disease from type 1, what is it? Well, our body still, for the most part, is making insulin. But the problem is this: our body's not responding to that insulin. So here's a couple of things that are all the same disease: prediabetes, metabolic disease, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes. All of these things are the same disease, and every one of them is totally different from type 1 diabetes. So now that we've cleared up some definitions here, let's go back to that question. Why do thin people get type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance? What's going on here? Well, we just talked about part of the clue a few minutes ago. Age. Age is a big deal. In fact, most of us have heard the three major drivers for type 2 diabetes. Yes, obesity is one of them, but age is the second one. And most of us know the third one. It's genetics. Now, each of these three things gets a little bit more complicated. Genetics, for example, there's genetics and then there's genetics. Have you ever heard of the methylome? Actually, pardon me for even bringing up that kind of term. There's a thing called epigenetics. Maybe I shouldn't even bring up that term, but here's something to know about epigenetics. It is a way where your genetic system has been changed such that your lifestyle has created diabetes, prediabetes, or conditions in your life. Maybe how heavy your mother got when you were born. That creates a difference in genetics. My dad was north of 350 pounds when I was conceived, and so that probably had an impact, or one of the reasons why, despite the fact that I'm thin, I can have diabetes. But at the end of the day, age is by far the biggest driver. And that's still going to raise the question, well, if age does that, how does it do it? Is it just because we're getting old and we're falling apart, or is it because, uh, as a friend of mine said, is it just because we're stressing our system so much, we've abused it so much that by the time we're in our 60s, we have a problem? So therefore, if we have managed our lifestyle, we won't get this problem. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Exactly how does the biology of prediabetes work? What's causing it, even for thin people? Here's another thing that we do know. If you look at the folks in our practice, we get routinely, on most people, we get an insulin survey. You've heard of the Kraft insulin survey. It's similar to an oral glucose tolerance test. We're challenging their ability to metabolize glucose. So, yes, I mean, you could do an A1C. That's what most docs think they're doing. Unfortunately, the American Diabetes Association says A1C misses 70% of cases. What most docs actually do is fasting glucose that they have got for pre-op or some other reason. And that's how most diabetes cases are actually diagnosed. But according to the ADA, fasting glucose misses 55%. So these aren't really good tests. The best tests are oral glucose tolerance tests with insulin survey. In other words, an insulin survey. If you've not heard about it, there's plenty of content on it. We have content, other folks as well. Just look up Kraft insulin survey. So anyhow, we do those for most people about once a year. Why once a year? Because again, age is the major driver of this problem. So what do we see? Well, yes, we'll see people go along like this, and then something will happen, and then their insulin resistance will take a big jump higher. Now, here's another pattern that we see very reliably. Every 10 pounds of weight loss will result in a big decrease in insulin resistance. So it gets back to that original point about the obesity epidemic driving the type 2 diabetes epidemic. If you have 10 pounds to lose, you really do have an opportunity to improve your prediabetes, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, whatever you or your doctor want to call it. Now, here's one thing that we haven't really talked about yet, and that is, how does body fat cause this problem? We know that it's one of the big three drivers, but how does it do it? A warning, maybe I should say geek warning. The last time I mentioned these three words to somebody, I could see their eyes glaze over, but I'm going to go there anyway. Body fat's just not an inert, harmless, but maybe not so attractive body tissue. It is an endocrine tissue. The fat cells, they're also known, a technical word, which we'll talk about in just a minute, adipose, has a hormonal component. There's actually three hormones I'm going to mention very quickly. A couple of them have technical names, so you don't need to remember the names, but the purpose is to realize how body fat cells can drive this problem, which in turn is the number one cause of death, disability, kidney failure, blindness, and for those who care more about it, erectile dysfunction. So what is it? again, there's some hormones that are driven by body fat. The first one is resistin. Now that sounds very interesting. Guess what it causes? It causes insulin resistance. There are a couple of others. One of them many people have heard of, leptin. Leptin is known as a satiety hormone. And if you haven't heard of satiety, it's that feeling of, oh, you know what? My stomach's full. I don't need to eat more. And then the third one is a technical name, adiponectin. Remember I said adipose tissue? It's adipocytes. Adiponectin actually makes the body more insulin sensitive, respond to insulin. So guess what? As body fat cells grow, the tank for long-term energy begins to get filled. It starts saying, I can't hold any more. It starts releasing a hormone called resistin, which tells your body, don't put any more blood sugar, don't store any more blood sugar or energy in these fat cells. We're getting full. Adiponectin does the same thing in reverse. And guess what? As those body fat cells increase, adiponectin decreases, resistin increases. And guess what happens to leptin? That hormone that makes us feel full? Yeah. In most cases, it decreases as our body fat changes. So again, body fat's a very, very endocrine tissue. So now we're getting to understand a little bit more deeply the biology of insulin resistance and how and why the this linkage is so strong between body fat and diabetes. So we'll talk a little bit more deeply today about how somebody with a BMI of 23, like mine, and 57 years old, can start showing blood sugars of 200. So if you'll pop the slide up, I'll talk a little bit more. Before we do, I'll talk a little bit more about our content for last week. Okay. So today we're going to cover a couple of topics. The major one is the one that I just described. It's how can thin people get insulin resistance, get prediabetes, diabetes. We're also going to touch just on a short topic, the details of calcified plaque. If you haven't been to our show before, if you haven't seen it, we cover all the things that create heart disease, the number one cause of death, stroke, Alzheimer's, and as we said, kidney disease, blindness. So last week we covered how does insulin resistant clog your arteries anyway. We had a guest on. His name is Mario Kratz, and Mario did a great job. He's very different from our typical live show. Mario just went right along with his slides and created much more of an explanation, more of a long-term type of discussion. The week before that, we talked about vitamin K2 with our guest, Gil Carvalho. Gil comes from a little bit more of a mainstream focus on cardiovascular disease. For example, LDL. I saw a video of him and one of the leaders in lipidology recently, and didn't agree with everything they said, but that doesn't mean we cannot have good conversations. In fact, it's when you have these disagreements that the conversations often get the best. Speaking of which, between last week's live event and this live event, we released one with Dave Feldman, Nick Norwitz, and a couple of the guys that are presenting something that really surprises the lipidology community, Thomas Dayspring, Peter Attia, who say LDL, and I agree, more importantly, ApoB. I think ApoB is a much better indicator than LDL. But they think that it is the major cause of heart attack and stroke, or they seem to. Maybe we'll get this misunderstanding cleared up, but I don't think so. I think it's metabolic disease. So we had a really good presentation. I think it was Thursday or Friday, um, about that specific debate. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. Jesus can give me a little bit more detail in a few minutes about how to find that video. And then we also talk about how to get your test done, the ultimate test for insulin resistance that your doctor obviously will not do. So let me back up just a little bit and ask Jesus if you will take the next slide and get us started on our content for today.
Absolutely. And going back to your comment about where to find that last video, just go into the PrepMed Health channel and search for "They Were Wrong About Cholesterol." I know, a catchy title. It's wrong in some eyes. I believe it's the first time we have a photo of Peter Attia on one of our videos. But it's an interesting discussion. It's more about the science more than it is about the person. So go ahead and take a look at it. And this is kind of the initial premise. And Dr. Burr already touched a little bit on that. Body mass index, and specifically body fat percentage, how much body fat you have on your body, is associated with insulin resistance. There's no doubt about that. But what we think usually is, so I need to be really, really fat, have a lot of fat under my belly that is noticeable, that I'm getting, I need to get large size pants in order to deal with this issue. And what we're going to present now to you, it's discussing the idea of maybe you don't need to be that big to be dealing with insulin resistance. So there's some research that suggests not all body fat causes insulin resistance. There are two main types of body fat. One is subcutaneous fat, which is basically the one that you have under your skin. But you also have visceral fat, which is the one that is around your body organs inside. And granted, it is real that subcutaneous fat, the one under your skin, will cause insulin resistance. There's no doubt about that. However, visceral fat seems to be a major driver of insulin resistance. The hormonal issue that happens over there, it's way more impactful than what is happening under your skin alone. So then you come to the concept that we we have touched this before a little bit, the TOFI person, the thin outside fat inside person. So you have two examples over here that we took from our guest last week, Mario Kratz. He came up with this slide. You have Jim, who is a apple shaped person who tends to store fat in the visceral fat deposits. Then you have Mark, who might have more of a pear-shaped body that tends to store fat in the subcutaneous fat deposits or depots. So both are a problem. We're not saying that the storing fat under your skin or in your belly, it's a healthy thing to do. However, if you are storing fat also within your organs, that's a big issue. That's a bigger driver than it is just to have a belly alone. So, and Dr. Bird, feel free to interrupt me at any time. I know you're passionate about this topic. The first time you shared that with me, there's one concept that it hasn't get to mainstream just yet. Within our community, we have people that are familiar with it, which is called the personal fat threshold, and I'm gonna do my best to explain that. So there is certain genetic predisposition to how much body fat you can store. And you can store body fat in multiple places. We mentioned visceral fat. We mentioned subcutaneous fat under your skin. Apolipoproteins such as LDL, VLDL, IDL are also places where you can store some fat. They're basically filled up with cholesterol and triglycerides. But the idea from the personal fat threshold is that you have just so much room to store fat below your skin. So some people are able to store tons of fat under the skin, under their belly, and I have seen plenty of people with that can even they can pass an OGTT, an insulin response test, with flying colors. And you're like, man, you have just so much fat below on your belly, but you're not dealing with insulin resistance. Those are really good genes. But then you have people that their limit on how much fat they can store under the skin is just too low. They cannot bring that much fat in there, but they still can store more fat. And guess where they do that? They store it within their organs. That's visceral fat. And this is when the biggest issue comes to be. And you will have a lot of people that are thin or fairly thin, and they think they're safe because they're not obese. And you need to guess twice if you think that you're safe just because you don't have obesity. So see here, insulin resistance develops once that threshold has been crossed. Once you have started to storage more fat within your organs or visceral fat. Fat cells, instead of recruiting more cells, they start to expand, which is called hypertrophy. And Dr. Mario Kratz explained this point really good last week. If you want to go ahead and take a look at it from the show from last week, which is basically saying it's not that you are developing more cells, more adipocytes, or more fat cells that are going to be just storage, but they are going to be functioning as they should. You're going to have one cell that is going to enlarge and it's going to overwork and create more hormones and create more impact on how you manage insulin. And if there's one thing that we should do a click on is insulin resistance, insulin alone needs to do more than just putting down your blood glucose. It also impacts the way you store energy. Basically said, insulin is going to avoid you being able to burn fat. So if you see here, this is a cycle where body fat impairs insulin function. And as you create more insulin, you're going to store more fat on your adipocytes. And this is just a cycle where you're going to stuck being fat and in being fat and being fat and not being able to burn all that fat that you need to do because of insulin resistance. Dr. Brewer, I think that at this moment you have come up with a simple way to explain this. I hope I brought a good template for you to give it a shot.
Well, actually, I was a little bit occupied with some of the questions, comments, and responses. Happy Healthy Life said it's adipocytes, not adipose tissue, and it's both. Healthy Life, and thank you, Bart, for helping correct that. To your point, Jesus. Yes. So here's the thing. Here's people like me, and there's a lot of us. I would say maybe 10% of us, and that percentage grows as we age. We just have less and less and less margin for error in terms of our margin for body fat in terms of insulin resistance. So part of that gets back to the issue of test, don't guess. Jesus, I don't think that I'm answering your question. Is there a specific item you're going after?
Well, I think that what I'm gonna do now is the people on the audience, if this was just too complicated and I wasn't able to explain it, let us know because I'll be happy to give it another shot. Basically, what we're saying is this personal fat threshold refers to how much body fat you can store on your belly or below your skin. Once you reach that maximum point of what you can store, you're going to start building visceral fat, and that can happen to somebody that apparently is thin. So that's kind of the whole message.
I think Mario, I'm sorry, Jesus. I think you were inviting me to do the interpretation thing. What Jesus is saying, and the folks get frustrated with that joke, and maybe it is a little bit overworn. But the point is, as Jesus is saying, a lot of the concepts that we talk about are complicated. Managing diabetes, prediabetes, and even understanding the cause can get pretty complicated. The concept that we're talking about today is this. There are multiple things that cause this problem. One, we talked about three big ones. One is genetics, which for the most part doesn't change. You certainly can't change it. One is age, and one is body fat. And so what happens is we become a little bit of a moving target in terms of trying to understand our metabolism and how many carbs we can burn. As we age, so for example, if you look at me when I was in my 20s, I would be able to hold a lot more sub-Q or under the skin body fat. But as I get older and older, it's not so much. I can hold less and less storage under my skin before it starts going into my organs and creating this problem, or peri-organ fat. So, you know what they say, it's growing old is not for sissies.
And you know,
that just happens over and over again to every one of us.
it does. And I'll be a little bit more concerned also about thinking that just because you don't have fat under your skin or on your belly, you're fine. I think that's one of the main takes from this one is, of course, if you are lean, that's good. But we want to make sure that they're lean, just not because you don't have so much subcutaneous or fat under your skin, but because you have a lot of muscle and that you are not developing too much visceral fat.
And
Now you bring up, go ahead, Jeannie.
Oh, I was just going to say, with that, one of the ways we can test for that too is with an MRI to look for visceral fat. And I know we had a patient the other day who requested that. And I saw in one of the comments, someone was talking about that also, but that is a way to test for that.
It is. And DEXA scan as well. People say, oh, you know, I've got this new thing. It's called InBody, INBODY. And I might get us disqualified for AdSense, but it is what it is. InBody is one of those things that looks at cutaneous electrical impedance, and there's a bunch of them. That technique has been around forever, meaning how much electricity your skin can transmit. So you hold on to handlebars on the InBody, and hopefully the resistance that you get from one hand to the other tells you what percentage of body fat you have. Really, really bad technology. Again, we've had it for a long time. It's not that good. You know, for a long time, they thought the gold standard for measuring body fat percentage was how well you floated. The reality is that one wasn't that good either, because it really depended on your ability to exhale and keep that air out of your body while they're doing the measurement. There are two techniques now that are really, really rock solid: DEXA scanning and MRI. And I've been wanting to get one for myself. I've had several patients do DEXA scan, and it is very, very helpful. I hope so. Our new channel manager, Nathan, has been pushing to do some experiments on my body, like have me eat eggs every day for 30 days and maybe 10 eggs a day or something like that, and see what happens. So one of the things we're going to do is get my labs repeated. I just had my CIMT repeated, and we're going to get get a DEXA scan because there's one near Atlanta, and I'm traveling down to that area quite a bit these days.
Well, we want to make sure that you're posting a video that says, this is what happened. This happened when I eat eggs for 20 days or whatever. You really did that. So it's not just theoretical or just clickbait. All right.
We'll take a picture of me eating 10 eggs. It'll be like, I don't know. We've got a lot of boomers in this channel. Maybe some of them remember that movie Cool Hand Luke, where they ate a lot of eggs.
Well, there are people who like seeing other people eating, so we can just put a stream of 3 days continuous you eating eggs on a closed loop. That's gonna draw eyes. So we're digressing. Let's go back to the personal threshold. So when we talked about hypertrophy, fat cells increasing, not how much fat cells you have, but one fat cell getting bigger and bigger, or one fat cell getting fatter, if you want to see it that way. That gives you or puts you in the trend of inflammation and insulin resistance, even in subcutaneous fat, but it's more on visceral fat. So this
Yes.
is, as we mentioned, a cycle of inflammation and insulin resistance all over again, just because of how much body fat you have in there.
So that brings up a question. Let me ask you. So are we saying this is only visceral fat?
Not at all. Subcutaneous fat, fat under your skin, is an issue as well, but it seems that
Okay.
visceral fat is way worse.
Dr.
Very
Brewer, on
good
the
point.
DEXA scan, on the DEXA scan, someone I saw in the comments, and I was just thinking about this too. When that's ordered, does it have to be ordered for body composition specifically in order for them to look at that? Or will they just do it on a basic DEXA scan?
No, you have really, really good point. Jeannie, as you know, one of the things that you really brought to the practice was this, let's make sure we get the test done right. And a couple of really good places to screw up the testing is just to send somebody for an insulin survey without arming them, vaccinating them against pardon me for using a politically charged term like vaccination.
You just got
Like
it
arming,
demonetized right now.
so, immunizing. Well, I shouldn't use that word either. But warning them about how OGTTs and insulin responses can get screwed up. You're right. A DEXA scan, the most common use of a DEXA scan is looking at osteoporosis. And you just need to call. What will usually happen once you go there and you tell the place what you're there for, they'll know. They'll tell you whether they do it. And even though there's DEXA scans all over the country, there are not that many that actually do it for body composition. You have to check it out. You have to look at it and know before you go.
Definitely. So I'm sorry, Dr. Brewer, I'm pulling us back to the topic. It has to do with that, of course. This is kind of the punchline for today. Thin people might have a reduced personal fat threshold, so they might be developing visceral fat early than those people that are fat on the outside, driving inflammation, insulin resistance, and ultimately diabetes.
So, what's the moral of the story?
Test, don't guess.
That's that's right. There you go.
So it's like
funny when we have patients. It's funny when we have patients in the visits and they actually say that because they've been watching. Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna put you on the spot. I'm gonna put you on the spot, Dr. Brewer. Who came up with that phrase? Was it you or Dr. Wright?
It wasn't either one of us.
Oh,
it was Brad Bale.
Okay, good.
Do you remember the Bale Deneen?
Sure, of course. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting.
And here's what else is interesting now that you mention it. At least it's interesting to me personally. Up until that point in my life, I was an anti-test guy. I said we do way too many testing. I was a who was the head of, pardon a digression, but there's a purpose behind it. Who was the head of internal medicine at Johns Hopkins that they were doing the presentation in the amphitheater? He got impatient, jumped up, slammed his hand on the table and said, "Listen to the patient, doctor. If you just listen, he'll tell you his diagnosis."
I know you said his name, but I can't remember it.
Dr. William Osler.
William Osler, one of the most famous physicians ever, and clearly over the past few hundred years. And his point was getting a history is critical. It's more important than anything else, and it takes time. But more than anything else, it takes a prepared mind. It takes a doctor that knows what to look for. I always felt that way, but it actually, the discussions with Brad underlined my own blind spot. And my blind spot is, well, everybody knows this. No, they don't. Everybody does not know what causes diabetes. Everybody does not know what their insulin response is. Everybody does not know how important insulin response is. So you really do have to let the individual's own body interpret for them what's going on. Just getting a generalization from a doc, no matter how much the doc may or may not know, is just not going to be enough. So I've had to admit I was wrong and Brad was right. Help the patient test, not guess.
Definitely. And this is more important when you have the CDC saying that at least 50% of Americans have insulin resistance. And there's a lot of people that are not aware of it.
So let me interrupt
As you do.
and provide, as I often do. It took me a while to warm up. I wasn't interrupting as much as you wanted me to at the beginning, but now I can't help it. Now I'm on a roll.
I asked for it.
To clarify this last statistic that you just quoted, the CDC already said at least 50% of Americans have insulin resistance. We used to say that starting at age 30. And why do we say age? Let's go back to the very beginning. Remember, we said there are 3 risk factors: genetics, body composition, and age, with age being the most important. So it was just up until a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, the CDC's website would say, well, a third of people age 60 and above have prediabetes that's not diagnosed. Well, many of us who do the kind of testing we're talking about thought that was wrong. And here's why. The CDC statistic was based on fasting glucose and A1C. And as you remember, fasting glucose misses 55% of this problem, and A1C misses 70%. So it's a very, very flawed way to say 30%. There were some studies that came out, published in JAMA Network, that re-looked at this and gave a better number compared to what many of us knew. It wasn't a third, and it wasn't starting at age 60. It was 50% of us, and it was starting at age 30. So if you were 30 years old, anybody your age and above had at least a 50% chance of having prediabetes, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance. Well, just when we thought we got that number out there, then a new study comes up, and it was based on NHANES, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. And it still said 50%, but it's not 30 anymore. It's starting at age 18. So as a country, we're getting more and more and more diabetic. And then we turn around and wonder why it's not unusual at all for somebody to die in their 60s from an unpredicted heart attack. So thank you for allowing the interruption and the rant.
Those are the ones that we're here for. We want to hear your rants and your perspectives. Anything that you want to point out to conclude this BMI, body fat discussion before we move on to the next topic?
No, let's go ahead and do the short and then get to some Q&A.
Sure. So I'll wrap it up with 2 things that come back to the test, don't guess thing. Test, don't guess to us means first get an OGTT with insulin response, an oral glucose tolerance test with insulin response. Find out if you have diabetes, pre-diabetes, of insulin resistance. Get a CGM, which is a Freestyle Libre monitor, or Dexcom G6, or any brand you want. make sure that you know how your body specifically reacts to the different carb sources that you're eating. I don't know if I told you this, Dr. Brewer. The more we research about glycemic index, the more I'm kind of a little bit skeptical or frustrated with that concept, because after all, every person is different and they're gonna react differently to any food source that might have the same glycemic index. But anyway, the only way to make sure that you know about that is getting one of those CGMs or using a finger stick glucometer, and making sure that you know how you respond to those food sources. And if you wanna get a, go ahead, yeah, go ahead, Dr. Brewer.
Let me interrupt and challenge that.
Sure.
A whole lot of people get very frustrated with CGM, but we use it anyway. I agree with you. I understand. As we're prepping some of our the content for our next videos, it is very frustrating to look at glycemic index. But you know what? Measuring glucose, we say eat to the glucometer. Measuring using a glucometer has its problems too. No wonder people get frustrated. This is a difficult topic, and the instruments we have often are very challenging.
Absolutely. And the next one, if you want to go ahead and get a DEXA scan with body composition, or MRI to scan how much body fat you have. I mean, that's part of the testing and knowing your body and making sure that you are aware of where you are, where you stand right now. Okay, so let me go. As I like to do, Dr. Brewer is pushing me to make things easier and more understandable. And I'm kind of pushing to go back and say, wait, but things are more complicated than we think they are. And I'm going to try to simplify this. And I'm trying to go back to just put a few lines on it, but still something that you can see graphically, that you can have an image on your head about how this is working. It might be helpful. So what you see here, it's a couple of images of what your arterial wall would look like if you have plaque. On your left, you have a clean vessel, which it looks like it has a hole on it because there's not so much plaque on it. But as you start developing plaque because of inflammation, insulin resistance, lipid storage, oxidative stress, and all those factors that are related to creating plaque, you're going to start building some of that goo that we mentioned that will increase inflammation and develop that soft part of soft plaque you have on your layers. And you can see that if you go to the image to the top and then go back to your right, you'll start seeing all of that happening. If you see those blue spots on the images below, the ones at the bottom, you see some blue spots in there. That's calcification. And if there's one point that I will want to make sure that you get from this image, is that calcification, it's a natural process of plaque. It's a healing process. However, there is a transition component on how fast and how good are you calcifying and stabilizing that plaque. The evidence is actually really clear. Calcified plaque is more stable. Calcified plaque is not going to rupture and cause a heart attack. However, you can still see some spots of calcified plaque here and there when you are within that process of calcifying. Even if you're doing that intentionally or not, your body is going to heal that plaque because that's what inflammation is about. But there's a balance in everything. As you go in and you have a lot of inflammation, a lot of that goo in there, you might calcify some places, but you're going to still develop soft plaque elsewhere, or even within the same place. So this is kind of the point about calcified plaque. It matters how you are calcifying it, and it matters how much plaque you're calcifying. So if you have just some spots of calcified plaque here and there, your process is incomplete. You still have a lot of goo, a lot of inflammation going around, and that's going to cause that you still have some plaque that is going to be, even if there's some calcium in it, it's going to be likely to rupture if you don't do the work. Then you come up with the concept of fibrous cap, which is the layer above fibrous. Thank you, Dr. Brewer. The fibrous cap. If that fibrous cap is just too thin, it's not big enough, it's not strong enough, it's gonna rupture. And even the calcium that you're developing on the bottom within that soft goo is gonna cause stress as well, and it's gonna make you more likely to rupture that. That's when calcium is dangerous, when you don't have enough, when you're still developing soft plaque, when you're still dealing with a lot of inflammation, when you're still dealing with insulin resistance, high blood pressure. And if you are able to build calcified plaque above, making a thick fibrous cap, even before having a heart attack, which is the image in the middle that you see here, this is the plaque that ruptured and caused a thrombus, a clot. This is a heart attack. And after a heart attack, you're going to kind of heal. But it's going to be like if you're putting a lot of layers on it, just dramatically and quickly as possible, instead of building that layer, that thick fibrous cap over time and making it stronger and more stable. So 95% of plaques that rupture had a thickness of 65 micrometers or less. The average thickness of plaques that rupture is about 23 micrometers. So the main message here is calcification is a natural process. It's a way of healing your soft plaque. But you want to make sure that you're doing that actively. And you do that with your lifestyle changes. Cutting your carbs, exercising, managing your other chronic diseases, including insulin resistance, high blood pressure, among other stuff that you might be dealing with, autoimmune diseases. But if you have some calcified plaque here and there, you have a positive calcium score, but you're not doing the work, you have a lot of body fat under your skin, a lot of body fat within your visceral organs, you're probably going to have trouble, because this fibrous cap is not thick enough to be strong enough to not break and not causing a heart attack.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so if when we do a CIMT and when we start to measure the plaque and 1.3 is where we start, and that's like equivalent to a strand of hair, right, Dr. Brewer?
Yes.
So what's 65 micrometers in comparison to that?
That's a Jesus question.
It's way less. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dr. Brewer.
So it's like half? Is that what
I could have said that, Jesus. I thought he was going to quantify it. Didn't you, Jeannie?
I did. Jesus, you're falling down on the job.
I like that. It's way less.
It is. I mean, if you see here, 1 micrometer is 0.001 millimeters.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
micro is
see here, 10 to the negative 6.
If you see 65 micrometers, that's like 0.065 millimeters. So maybe a CIMT is not gonna catch the specificity. The exact measurement of the fibrous cap. However, you're going to be able to see how thick that is. If you have a fibrous cap that is most of that plaque, if you have a plaque of 1.3 millimeters, and most of that is calcified, you can see that on the ultrasound. It's going to be way more than 65 micrometers.
Okay.
That's what we call the stable plaque. The way they're measuring this is with intravascular ultrasounds and some special tomography, and then cutting that and putting on a lab. So this is kind of the deep science behind all of that. But basically, the whole point is, if you want to stabilize your plaque, and we're not even talking about reversal, which is another topic, but if you want to stabilize your plaque and making sure that if you have any cardiovascular plaque on your arteries, you want to make sure that you have most of that calcified. And it's very likely to start from the bottom to above. So that's why some spotty calcifications on the bottom of all that goo, inflammation goo, that's not necessarily stable. You want to make sure to take that goo out, decrease inflammation, and building calcium that it's going to go into the upper layer. Some of that develops on the upper layer right from the beginning, but there's no way to control that, at least not specifically. The only thing you can do is manage your lifestyle and making sure that you're getting rid of that inflammation, because to us that's more important even than how much LDL and ApoB you have going around.
Okay.
A good point.
Good.
Here we are, smack in the middle of the holidays. People are wanting to get back to their family. Why don't we go to Q&A? Can you hear me?
We can, and I have a problem right now because my whole image of no answer for you, it just doesn't matter anymore. You just go ahead and answer people's questions. What's
You're
the
doing
point?
your best. Well, many. Not going to get philosophical on that. Let me ask you: were you two able to hear the sound during the
Yes.
transition?
Yes.
Oh, for some reason, I'm just not able to hear it. Okay. Yeah, life is tough, Jesus.
No, that's okay, because we have just so many questions and we want to make sure that we address most of you. But if you want to have your question on the show, if you want to see your name over here, just like Rick's, make sure that you become a YouTube member. We haven't settled that discussion with, I believe it was D-Dot, and that said, oh, it's like $15. I think it's a little bit less,
Oh, we did.
unless you are a YouTube. You have YouTube Premium, which will get rid of ads and all that stuff. But it's different. That's a different situation. Anyway,
Yeah, what he was talking about was he joined YouTube Premium, and you're just saying join the channel. That's different from YouTube Premium.
Yeah, so you have to go to our channel, PrepMed Health, and click on join. It will be next to your subscribe button. And I see a lot of YouTubers saying, "Oh, click the bell so you get notifications of whenever we're posting a video." You can do that if you want. Share, hit that like button or a dislike button if you don't like the show. And if you don't like the show, dislike it and share it with your enemies. We're gonna appreciate that. So, Rick Folia, can you encourage Dave Feldman to add CIMT to his protocol? We missed the golden opportunity to see how well CIMTs correlate with CT angiograms on his research. I mentioned the CIMT thing on our video that we posted. You can go ahead and watch it. I think the whole purpose is more about LDL and lean mass hyperresponders than it is about CIMT, unfortunately.
So, yeah, the short story is we did encourage it, and we got nowhere. We fell flat on our face. Dave is not going to do it, and it's part of the. You look at his team. The senior researcher is
Mario
Butoff. Matt Butoff. And Matt Butoff has done a whole bunch of stuff in terms of imaging. None of it involved CIMT. He did a lot of the original work on calcium score. One of the major strengths that Matt Butoff brings to the table is that even though he's a very well recognized and accepted standards of medicine cardiology researcher, he's very open to things. He's looked at garlic. He's looked at calcium score when everybody thought that was goofy and was worthless. He did a lot of the research indicating it's not goofy, it's not worthless, it's very helpful. And now he's doing a lot of research involving CT angiogram and AI-driven CT angiogram. But he hasn't done a whole lot on CIMT, and I don't expect him to. So, You know what? You win some, you lose some. We're going to
Yeah.
lose on CIMT on that item. And the bottom line is we'll probably lose long term on CIMT because the imagery is just so striking on
CT angiogram.
CC angiogram. Yeah.
Yeah, that's computed CT angiograms. Yes, and I know that you're hard to convince sometimes, Dr. Brewer. When I saw it clearly,
Yeah.
I think the thing that got me from the CT angiograms was until I saw the first report of Clearly, and I
Yeah.
was like, man, this is really detailed. This is really good. And I was like, well,
It is.
I'll be more willing to recommend a CT angiogram than Dr. Brewer is, because we know the advantages of a good CIMT. Unfortunately, the CIMT technology is not as easy to get on the US as it's way more easy to get a CT angiogram. But still, the CT angiogram has challenges. We have seen CT angiograms interpreted by cardiologists that have no mention of soft plaque at all. So that
Yeah.
beats the whole purpose of a CT angiogram. So
I have to be the old curmudgeon, the old grump of the crowd. So I'm just doing my role.
okay, let's move on. Robert Pinsky, my A1C went from 5.2 to 5.1 3 months after starting as SGLT2 inhibitor. That's like empagliflozin or some of those. How much will you expect A1C to drop when it's already pretty low? That's a good question. And Dr. Brewer already answered that. So yeah, I think I agree with Dr. Brewer. Even though there's research that says the empagliflozin is really good with A1Cs, there's kind of a threshold on that as well. People who have a really high A1C will have a lot of impact, but those who are already low, maybe not so much.
You got to understand how it works. Basically, it stops, the kidney, when your blood sugar gets over a certain amount, the kidney starts spilling that sugar, which gets back to this whole thing of what is diabetes anyway, and why do fat cells create insulin resistance? They're getting full. They're saying, we have stored all the energy we need. We don't want any more. So the blood sugar won't go into the fat cells. Now it just floats around getting higher and higher. The kidney, once it starts, the kidney usually has mechanisms for pulling blood sugar back out of the urine collection ducts and putting it back into the blood. But that's where SGLT2s come in. That SGLT2 mechanism is what pulls sugar back out of the urine and puts it back into the blood. And SGLT2 inhibitors decrease that. So guess what? If your blood sugar, Robert Pinsky, if you're managing your blood sugar, we have plenty of diabetics whose challenged blood sugar goes up to like 350. But still, through keeping their body composition intact and maximized, and keeping their daily carbs to a low level, you put a CGM on them and it never goes over 120. Mm-hmm. Now, if you give them 75 or 100 grams of glucose, their blood sugar goes to 350. So that's the real opportunity. People get mad at me when I say, I think you might be diabetic. They get mad because they say, well, look, I'm exercising, I'm managing my diet. And it's like, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I am just saying you'll know now and you'll be motivated to continue that lifestyle that you're doing. So
and they call that diet controlled, right?
Say that again?
Controlled, they call that diet controlled. When they're diet controlled, it means their blood sugars are stable and they don't need any intervention besides controlling their diet to keep the blood sugar under 120, 140. Right?
Yeah. And that's the promise, the opportunity of knowing what happens if you fall off the wagon. We all fall off the wagon. The question is, how far do we fall and how quickly can we get back up?
Oh man, if we did fall off the wagon, don't go there. Christmas was brutal.
Christmas was, the CGMs were singing, weren't they?
Oh,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm on my 30s, so I still have some kind of advantage over there, but I don't think I can do that so often anymore.
It just helps you. I mean, there's still ways to celebrate. There's still ways to have a little bit of something. For example, despite what I do, I had some coconut cake last night. It's my favorite holiday thing. And here's what I do: I'll eat pieces of the the icing, and I'll leave the layer cake. The flour part, because I know that the icing is mostly fat and oil with some sugar in it, and you know the the layers of the cake are just full of complex carbs. People say complex carbs, they're great. They're grain products. They're great. Grain products probably cause more problem than sugar long term for most diets. Anyhow, back to Robert Pinsky's question. Robert, if you're one of these people that's keeping your blood sugar less than 120 with diet, lifestyle, exercise, and body composition, you take an SGLT2, it's not likely to drop your A1C that much. But that's a good thing. And
I'm sorry, go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
We
go
have
ahead.
that conversation quite often with our patients where they say, well, should I take an SGLT2 or should I take a GLP-1? And the answer is, well, the GLP-1s have been, you do have diabetes, typical conversation with one of our diabetic patients. You do have diabetes, but the thing is, these randomized clinical trials that showed as the GLP-1s were just knocking it out of the park, or SGLT2s were knocking it out of the park, the people that were in those randomized clinical trials were not like your typical patient in our practice, where they're with lifestyle already, they're managing their blood sugar down to 120. So it's still a little bit of a guessing game to guess how much they are miracle drugs, how much these drugs are going to help somebody who's already managing your lifestyle.
Definitely. And I don't want to be a bummer, but I'm also like skeptical about 5.2 to 5.1. Sometimes labs
I agree.
Yeah, like
Probably
0.1
not
might
significant.
not be that significant. I mean, it's good to see it lower, but it's more significant where it's a little bit more points, so we can make sure that it's not just because how the lab measure that. Let's move on a little bit. JMK, I know she's not she or he is not a member. This is a great topic to discuss, especially as related to why fasting insulin and insulin surveys are so important, even in thin people. That's the whole message. Glucose tolerance test and insulin response. Richard Militello, good morning. He said you to member as well, as you can see on the icon. Brad, this is a great podcast topic. Thank you. I was a little bit concerned because we have seen a trend of our latest YouTube videos having more and more eyes on them. And I was a little bit concerned that this topic wasn't going to draw as much attention as it's doing. So thank you, Brad. Rick again, I am 6 foot 1 inch, 152. DEXA scan show that still have 2 pounds of visceral fat. Tofu for sure. Thin outside, fat inside. Looks like I have some work to do. Yep, that's the whole point. You might think that with a 6 foot height and 152 pounds, you're good, and you might have a lot of muscle mass on you. But still, you can be dealing with this. DEXA in Atlanta is great. Highly recommended for those who are in the Atlanta area. Gary, formerly GLR, I just had a DEXA scan for bone density. Ask the tech about this. It seems those don't show visceral fat. Do you have to have it? You have to specify it. Have that specified by doc. Yes, you have, and sometimes their machine might not do it. So that's why you have to ask first. Some machines are not able to pull that out.
They are excellent at showing fat versus muscle in like a leg. Some of those images are just very dramatic.
Definitely. Brad again, low carb, calorie deficit, OMAD, 1 meal a day has been the only protocol that has allowed me to lose weight. Weight goes down, glucose lowers, blood pressure levels out. The shocking truth is we eat too much food. Yes, and how often do you see that, Jeannie or Dr. Brewer, when you have people that are on low carb diet, they see all these benefits. They're even on a keto version of low carb diet, if you want to see it that way, even carnivore. And at the beginning, they have like really good benefits. Then they hit a plateau on their weight loss. And a lot of cases is you're not eating that much carbs, but you're still eating a lot of calories. And that's when you come up and say, well, calories sometimes matter as well. You want to make sure,
Well,
especially
they
those who are
do.
on carnivore or saturated fats, sometimes it's easy to eat more calories than you think you're eating. Sometimes that has an impact as well. But you cannot deny the effects of a low carb diet. It's dramatical when you see people who have never lost that much weight. They start a low carb diet, they start intermittent fasting, and they start seeing those results. Jeannie, I mean, I
No,
started with a question and then I did not let you answer. I'm sorry.
no, it's true. And again, I mean, everything's very specific to people, and that's why the CGM helps and everything helps. But definitely, sometimes when people eat the one meal a day and it's 4,000 calories, it's, counterproductive, even if it is low carb because it's so many calories. So there's a lot of specifics that go into diet and all of these different factors. And that's why we try to teach people how to learn for themselves what works for them, why it works, why it doesn't work. Because we have people come back and say, "Hey, I'm doing this; it's not working." So then we have to try to tweak it and help them in a different way.
Definitely. So we have Rick answering to "Starving Myself to Life," which is a really good name as well. My understanding is visceral fat should be less than 10% of total body fat. I think there some people say 13, some people say 9, some people say 10. If you are around those margins, I think that's a safe number. Do you have any other information on it?
Not me.
I mean, yeah, but it's part of the. It's gonna sound counterproductive when I say test, don't guess, and then I say, well, the exact numbers may not be as important, and we focus more on trends more than a specific number. It's not so much about, oh, you need to get down to 9. I mean, it depends. It always depends.
Always depends.
Well,
Yeah,
I think we know that 30 to 50% is not a healthy number.
yeah, exactly right. That's the point. Jerry, some might be iodine deficient, but a practitioner gave me some kelp tablets years ago as an iodine source. It made me feel like it sucked my finger in an electric socket. I mean,
That's
my
having to do with the thyroid. When you think that that's maybe helping get the thyroid moving.
yeah, exactly right. I mean, I don't have that much of experience with kelp tablets. Do you, Dr. Brewer?
No.
I mean, micronutrients are an issue, and each and every one of those are different, and we have some perspectives on, especially vitamin D, B12, magnesium, and all of that. And iodine, of course, for thyroid function is really important. I think I have heard about kelp tablets before. I have never recommended those. Not my area of expertise. Rick Folia, Bobby Ocampo, second the Sean Amara invite. I've been sending emails, making phone calls, Dr. Brewer, to get more people on the show. Um, Hopefully, I'm gonna be successful for others. We have a special guest for January 11th. I'm not gonna spoil the beans,
The rest
but
of it spill the beans. Jesus spoils them.
that's a really good name to invite. I'm gonna make an effort to see if they're interested of joining. You'll see some people are happy to join us. Some people are maybe just too busy or don't wanna do it. And that's okay.
As some of us have heard of the Ed Sullivan Show. He always said, "Tonight we're going to have a really big show, and we're going to have one on January 11th."
Definitely. Brad, test until you know the problem, then test to see if your solutions are working. Yes, that's what we do. That's preventive medicine right there. Even if you don't
Yep.
feel anything, that's preventive medicine. You need to know where you are, and it's not about chasing numbers. It's about having the full picture to understand your specific situation.
Can I have a rant right there?
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead. I'd love to see one of those.
Well, I think that that's the most eye-opening thing about this practice is that we start and then we monitor every 3 months. And so people can see an intervention that they're doing in 3 months of doing it. And does that make a difference or does it not? And when you look at the whole picture and when we have a visit and we show them the whole picture, they see the outcome. And that either encourages them to continue on or that makes them want to do something different. But we can see the labs and we can say, hey, did you start doing something differently here? And that's either good or bad. And we can see the numbers, they tell us what's going on. So I think that is probably very well said, Brian.
Definitely. And Rick
Thank
Folia,
you,
why?
Jeannie. That was very well said too.
Yeah, that's the whole point. And thank you for translating for both Dr. Brewer and I. Sometimes we get just too focused and deep into the research and the fancy terms, and we forget that we need to be simplifying some stuff sometimes. Rick Folia, why isn't there a CGM type of device for reading insulin continuously? I'm guess there's some people working on that. The main thing here is the CGM doesn't look for the glucose that is in your blood directly. It looks for the glucose that is on a space between your skin and your vessel. So the glucose can go through the vessel wall easily after a few minutes, and it's kind of similar to your blood glucose levels. And that's why you see the CGM has a needle, which is a soft needle, not that large, that will get all those readings.
Because it's checking the serum, not the blood, right?
It's kind of an interstitial tissue, which is between the cells, kind of outside of the vessel, basically. But the thing is, the insulin molecule is just way too large. It is not in there. So if you develop an a continuous insulin model, it will have to go through to the blood necessarily. So I think that makes it more challenging. Dr. Brewer, any input on that?
No, I was just answering Lotem Ben Atar that said, what about people getting, do carbohydrates really matter if energy balance is kept and the individual's physically active?
Oh, thank you.
And here was the answer. And I actually referred to insulin. I didn't mean to talk about insulin, but insulin. Calorie counts matter. We just talked about that. You've been hearing about that from us from the very beginning. But the point is, most people respond to hormones. Hormones drive our behavior. We can understand that when we're talking about gender-related hormones about a teenager, but for some reason, we don't seem to be able to wrap our heads around food-related hormones, eating-related hormones, insulin-related hormones for middle agers. That's what we're talking about. And I don't think there's any, I don't want to sound too, I don't think there's much room to say hormones don't matter in terms of lifestyle. I just don't.
They do.
They do, and they matter. And I think that the research on hormones and how hormones affect things, men, women, age, all those things, there's a lot of variables. I'm seeing more and more on that. In fact, yesterday I saw a graph and it talked about women and why different ways women gain weight. And, is it this? Is it from trauma? Is it this? Is it cortisol? Is it from this? Is it from chronic dieting? And so all these different factors are out there. And I think more and more is going to, in the research will come out as time goes on, as people can identify and measure it. I think that's been a big part of the problem. No one knows, they don't always have good tools to measure hormones. And we've talked about that before, even cortisol. We know cortisol can be a factor, but there's really no good tool to measure it. So.
And Jeannie, you and Heather are our best at managing those related issues. And they're so critical.
And just to wrap it up, we are over the one hour mark. hour and 14 minutes. I was wondering at the end of your presentation, can you add a recap of key points? Yes, I'll happy to do that. I think that's a really good idea. Thank you, Woody. And of course, you can take screen captures or anything you want to do about these videos and presentations. This is life-saving information that we're giving out for free for all people who need it. So that's good. And I'm gonna close with this one, Dr. Brewer. I'm putting you on the spot a lot today. I'm sorry, but it's Christmas. Well, after Christmas, any new on doing the 2-day
That's your
program?
gift.
I got to,
That's your gift from Jesus, putting
I'm
you on
sorry?
the spot. That's your gift from Jesus, putting you on the spot.
okay. That's exactly what I was asking. What has Christmas got to do with putting me on the spot? So you're putting me on the spot to say, where is it? When is it?
If there is any, I mean, probably Fred is not gonna be happy if we spoil the beans on this one as well. Just
Yeah,
So-
I'm not going to spoil those beans. But we've gone back and forth. The bottom line was the response was so good for the Tampa, the Clearwater, St. Pete event. It was more than twice as big as any that we've had before. We had, as we often do, we had a couple of middle-aged men break down into tears. It's an emotional issue because people are looking at this and thinking, I'm staring death right in the face. And it's a serious issue. You know, you and I get beat up a lot for being silly. And sometimes we are too silly. But the bottom line is we're trying to bring a little bit of lightheartedness to a very, very serious topic. We've had a couple of challenges. We decided very soon after that event in St. Pete, we're going to do it again, and it will be out west. We had some challenges in terms of the coordination team. We're still working through those challenges. I expect we're going to make it spring out west. Now, that's not spilling the beans.
okay, good. So anything that you want to add for the closing remarks? Really good show.
Not for me. How about you, Jeannie?
No, just have a happy new year. And if you wear your CGM and you decide to drink, you'll see what happens there, I guess, right?
Don't fall off the
Yeah.
wagon that much. Yeah.
I do have one thing to say. Thank you for your interest.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.